First John. This morning we're going to wrap up chapter 4, and then we're going to take a break. We're going to have Palm Sunday next week. The following week is Easter. Then we're going to pick up chapter 5. We've got Mother's Day in May, and we'll wrap this thing up by the end of May. So we have been talking about John. John writes this book to address an issue called Gnosticism. Gnosticism was a belief that the material world and the physical world are completely separate. And John addresses that. And one of the things that he addresses in that book is, what does it look like to be a Christian? When you call yourself a Christian, what does that look like? How do you know for sure you're a Christian? And so John writes this book to say, this is what an actual Christian looks like. And we've talked about the different things that John has addressed. Last week, Jimmy and talked about chapter 4. In the beginning of chapter 4, John deals with what is truth. And he deals with the idea that as a Christian, you can separate and you can understand what is truth and what is error. Now this morning, John is going to flip the script on us, so to speak. And John is going to start to address this issue of love, the opposite side of truth. Because when you talk about truth and love, you have to be very, very careful. If God is all truth, without love, it leads to legalism. If you have love without truth, it leads to liberalism. It leads to a God that's all fuzzy, so to speak. So John writes this to say, let's talk about this issue of love. Let's look at this issue of what does it mean to really genuinely love. John mentions the idea of love 43 times in this book. 5 chapters, he mentions it 43 times. What's interesting is, this morning we're looking at chapter 4, verse 7 to the end of chapter 4, and then we have chapter 5. And in that amount of time, John uses the word love 32 times. So a majority of this discussion of love comes from this chapter 7, verse 4 and verse 7 on. He uses it 28 times as a noun. He uses it 18 times as a verb. I'm sorry, I got it backwards. 28 times as a verb, 18 times as a noun. So John's going to hit this issue of what does it look like? What does love mean? And we're going to try to wrap our heads around it this morning. So here we go. Verse 7. Dear friend. This is, I think, the 6th time he's used this term. John says, look, dear friend, let us love one another, for love is from God. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. Whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. It's one of the things that he mentions, and he's going to mention this over and over again about this idea of love one another. But the idea is, John says, God is love. Now, in the Old Testament, God was somewhat concrete. And the idea that he was very, very specific, and they could kind of wrap their ideas around this idea of God. In the Greek culture, he was more abstract. So John here basically says, you need to know this about God. God is absolute love. Now, one of the things that's interesting is, I like what one person said. They said it's impossible for God to act in any way other than loving. And yet, we know God is a God of judgment. The Bible says God is holy. So how do you balance that out? Well, here's what you're going to find. Genuine love has an aspect of discipline and holiness and judgment with it. We just got done with the baby dedication, child dedication. So let me talk about parenting for a second. If you parent without setting boundaries and consequences to your kids' decisions, you don't love them. You love yourself more than you love them. And the reason I say that is because I deal with so many parents like, well, I just want to be a friend to my kid. Wait a minute. Your kid could get friends. You are their only parents. Parent them. We live in a world which we take the natural world and we don't translate it into a spiritual, practical world. Look, Many of you have animals. Some of you are dog people, some of you are cat people, some of you are livestock people. Every one of you that has an animal sets boundaries for that animal. If you have livestock, you put up fences. If you have a dog, if it's an inside dog or an outside dog or whatever else, you have rules for that dog. You have rules for that cat. And there are consequences. We've lived on a farm long enough. We've always had farm dogs. I know this. Whenever a dog starts chasing a car, his days are numbered. Because at some point, the car's going to win. I've lost enough dogs to cars over the years to learn. So when I see a dog, when I see my dog starting to chase a car, I discipline. I make sure that it knows, bad dog. This is a bad thing. Now, it doesn't understand you're going to die if you keep this up. That's my job to help it stay safe. You do the same thing with your children. Okay, I'm really going to step on toes now. You do the same thing as a grandparent. This idea of grandparenting that says, I'm going to be the hero and I'm not going to discipline my grandchildren, or I'm not going to tell my grandchildren no. It's not healthy. Your job is to support parents. And you need to do that. So you know what? We have candy jar at our house. And I have grandkids over all the time. It's not like, you're grandpa's, eat all the candy you want. No, I say, Aaron, is it okay if Alden has something out of the candy jar? Why? Because I want to set boundaries for them. I want to help them grow up to understand life is about boundaries. When you love, you set boundaries. When you love, you care about something so that you say, look, this is dangerous. I don't want you to go down this road. I don't want you to go down this path. Love is focused on what's best for the person, not what's best for me. I want to be your friend. No, it's focused on what I need to do for you. I started this week. Claire's going on vacation. She wants to earn some money. So she's working for Grandpa now. So I sat down with her this week. Now, she's 9. I sat down with her this week. I said, okay, let's talk about how the real world works. I want to know what you're going to charge me to work for me. She said, I want $3 an hour. I said, you know what? You work hard, I'll give you $5 an hour. I said, now in the real world, we write down our time. I said, so let's set up a time card. So we put our name on her time card. She worked on Thursday, she worked 45 minutes. Said, this is your time card. I said, now in the real world, here's the way it works. You get paid on a certain deal. So I said, Grandpa gets paid once a month. I said, Nana gets paid every 2 weeks. I said, a lot of people get paid every week. And I said, no, mostly, it usually comes on Friday. So when would you like to be paid? She said, Friday sounds good. I said, okay. I said, so every Friday, we'll total up how many hours you put in, and Grandpa will pay you. I said, that's the way this is going to work. Why? My job is to help her to get ready for life. Did we have fun? Yes. We got more done in 45 minutes than I could have done in 3 hours. I can't wait for her to get off of school. You know, I'm making up projects in my head of stuff. We did stuff on Thursday that I've wanted to do but didn't have the time to do. And it's awesome. And here's what I found. We were picking up a lot of sticks, too, because, you know, winter. And I normally just run over with a mower, but I thought, well, I got her. $5 an hour, this is a good deal. And here's what I realized. She's lower to the ground. So it's easy for her to grab all of these sticks. And we had piles. We did 3 loads of sticks. I normally would run over the mower. Why? Because my goal, I love her. And love means I have to set some boundaries. I have to teach her some things. And this is what John says. He says, if you don't love, you don't even know God. And then he goes on, notice what he says next. He said, this is how God showed us love among us. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we love God, but that he loved us, and he sent his son an atoning sacrifice for sin. On Easter, we're going to talk about this idea of the atonement. We're going to talk about what it really means and how it all applies. But basically what John does say is here, he says, you need to understand, love is active. Love does something. In God's case, God loved us, so he sent his son. And he sent his son into the world that we might live through him. And then he goes on and he says this. He says, dear friends, again, this idea. Since God so loved us, we got to love one another. No one's ever seen God. But if we love one another, God lives in us, and his love is made complete in us, or it's mature. John says, look, if you're going to call yourself a Christian, love needs to be part of your life. And you ought to be maturing or being complete in love. In other words, it ought to grow. Here's what he's saying. If you call yourself a Christian, you should be more loving today than you were this time last year. You ought to be more loving than you were 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. You grow in your love if you call yourself a Christian. And he said, because here's what's happened. He said, this is how we know that we live in him. And he and us. He has given us his Spirit. And we have seen and testified that the Father has sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. He comes back to this idea that Jesus Christ came so that we could have salvation. And then he says, if anyone acknowledges that Jesus is the Christ of Son of God. So he says, once you have decided to put your faith and trust in Jesus Christ, he died for you. He wants to save you, but you have to trust him. He said, once you do that, if you acknowledge him, God lives in you, and they in God. In other words, what he says is, God now takes and dwells in you. Now, here's a question for you. If God is love, and God lives in your heart, how can you hate? Because what he says is, and that's how we know and we rely on the love that God has for us. He goes on to say this, God's love. Whoever lives in love lives in God, and God in them. This is how love is made complete among us, so that we have confidence on the day of judgment. In the world, we're like Jesus. John says, look, when God is in your heart, and you know that God is love, he said one of the things that it will do for you is it will give you confidence in the day of judgment. Here's what he's saying. It means you don't have to worry about dying. You don't have to go, well, when I die, I hope that God will weigh all my good against all my bad and I'll be in heaven. No. When you have God in you, it gives you a confidence so you don't have to worry about death. One of the things that I think is amazing, you want to look at how you responded to COVID. Everybody responded in different ways. For me, if I died of COVID, I was okay with it. Why? Absent from the body, present with the Lord. I'm good. God's in me. I stand before God. I'm good because of Jesus Christ. There's a confidence that comes with that. He goes on to say this. There's no fear in love. Perfect love drives out fear. He says, fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect or mature in love. He said another thing. He said, you don't live in fear. So when COVID hit, or, everybody's all worried about, well, if I get it, I'll die, and da-da-da-da-da. I'm like, you know what? I'm not saying you be frivolous about it, but I wasn't worried about dying from it. I'm not worried about death. Why? There's no fear in love. I know what's going to happen. I have a confidence because of what Jesus Christ has done. That's what John says. And God's in you, so it's okay. And then he goes on to say this, and this is where he drives it home. We love because we first loved us. Whoever claims to love God and hates a brother or sister is a liar. Whoever does not love their brother or sister whom they have seen can't love God whom they have not seen. And he has given us this command. Anyone who loves God must, has to, doesn't have the option, but to love the brother or sister. So let's get real. You're sitting here this morning and you say, I love God. I'm a Christian. But I hate my ex. And your ex is a Christian. You know what John says? You're a liar. Because if the love of God is in you, you can't hate a brother or sister in Christ. You're sitting here and you go, you know what? I just, this person did me wrong in business and I just hate them. And they're a Christian? You have to check whether or not you're a Christian. That's what John says. I mean, this is bold. He doesn't mince words here. He says, look, you need to understand, if the love of God, if God is in you and God is love, you have no option but to love. And if you hate and you call yourself a Christian, you need to really check as to whether or not you are a child of God. I want to close this morning. And those of you who are in small group, you're going to spend the entire small group talking about this story. I printed it off from Wikipedia. I lived through this, and I remember this. And I'll read you the story. Some of you may remember the Mickle School mines in 2006. The community was a Amish community in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. On October 2nd, 2006, a guy by the name of Charles Robert the Fourth entered the schoolhouse. He let everybody go but the girls. He took them hostage. He shot 10 girls, ages 6 to 13, before he committed suicide and took his own life. He was 32 years old. He was a milk truck driver. He had a wife and 3 children. He and his wife had lost a child just after birth, about 9 years before this. And in one of the suicide notes, he left a number of suicide notes, but in one of the suicide notes, he said this: he was filled with hate towards himself and towards God. On the day of the shooting, a grandfather of one of the murdered Amish girls was heard warning the young relatives, do not hate the killer. We must not think evil of this man. Another Amish father noted he had a mother and a wife and a soul, and he's now standing before a just God. Jack Meyer, a member of the Brethren community living in the Amish in Lancaster County, said, I don't think there's anybody here that wants to do anything but forgive and not only reach out, and not only, but to reach out to those who have suffered a loss in a way, and reach out to the family of the man who committed these acts. Robert's family spokesman said, an Amish neighbor confronted the Roberts family hours after the shooting and extended forgiveness to them. Amish community members visited and comforted the Roberts widow, his parents, and his parents-in-law. One Amish man held Robert's sobbing father in his arms, reportedly for as long as an hour, to comfort him. The Amish set up a charitable fund for the family of the shooter. About 30 members of the Amish community attended Robert's funeral. And Maria Roberts, the widow of the killer, was one of the few outsiders that was invited to the funeral of one of the victims. Marie Roberts wrote an open letter to her Amish neighbors, thanking them for their forgiveness, grace, and mercy. She wrote, your love for our family has helped to provide healing we so desperately needed. Gifts you have given have touched our hearts in a way that no words can describe. Your compassion has reached beyond our family, beyond our community. It's changing our world, and we sincerely thank you. The Amish do not normally accept charity, but due to the extreme nature of the tragedy, donations were accepted. Richard Lauer, director of the Anabaptist Foundation, said the Amish community, whose religious beliefs prohibit them from having health insurance, will likely use the donations to help pay medical costs and hospitalized children. Some commentators criticized the quick and complete forgiveness with which the Amish responded. They argued that forgiveness is inappropriate when no remorse has been expressed, that such an attitude runs the risk of denying the existence of evil. Others were supportive. Letting go of grudges is so deeply rooted in the value of the Amish culture. The Amish willingness to forego a vengeance does not undo the tragedy or pardon the wrong, but rather it constitutes the first step towards a future that is more hopeful. They demolished this school within a week. 6 months later, they built New Hope School on a different site, and they decided to make it different in every way possible. Here's a question for you this morning. You want to know what love looks like? The question we're going to wrestle with in small groups this week is this. Would you be able to love like that? I will be honest. I can't stand up here and tell you I would. Do I hope I would? But the only way I could is with the help of God. The world struggled watching how these people responded. I remember watching newscasts and they would talk about, I don't understand how they can do that. That's silly that they would do that. They're not taking it serious enough. They lost. I think it was, when it was all said and done, one of the children lived for a while and then died a number of years later because of complications. There were 6 of them that were killed. The coroner who walked into that building said there was not a piece of furniture in it that didn't have blood. God is love. And if He's in your heart, you have no choice but to love. You say it's hard. Didn't say it was easy. So you don't know how much hurt. I didn't say it wouldn't be hurt. But we have a Savior who came to a world that hated Him, that despised Him, that crucified Him, that wanted nothing to do with Him. And all He had to do at any moment was wipe them off the face of the planet. But He didn't. So I end this morning with this. John wants us to realize that original love, genuine love, originates from God. God set an example, and He gives us the power to love in the same way. He demands that if we're going to call ourselves believers, we show love to the people around us. Let's pray. Lord, help us. Easy to say, hard to do. God, we're going to need your help in some of these very difficult situations. We're going to have to allow you to speak through us. Lord, for those that have hurt us, for those that we're angry with, Lord, I pray that you would help us to learn to love. And Lord, if you tarry in your coming and we're here this time next year, may we be able to look back and say we're more loving then than we are now. So use this in our lives. Help us to apply it. And we'll give you the honor and the glory and the praises as we ask in your name.